Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Shimkus.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at desk. It's Shimkus 001. I had two. I'm only going to offer one.
Mr. Chairman, just parliamentary.
Yes, Mr. Dingle.
Can you give us a rough idea of what that time estimate would be based upon the agreement which we just have?
Well, we're talking about 50. Well, that's a lot of time. We're talking about 4 times 20 more minutes.
So that's 80 minutes. That's an hour.
No, 5 minutes on each side. No.
20 more minutes in this title.
20 more minutes on this title.
We'll be through about 5.
Excluding roll call votes.
I'm going to go quick. I agree.
Mr. Shimkus.
As
an amendment at the desk, clerk will report the amendment. Gentlelady from
Amendment to the committee print offer.
Colorado reserves a point of order.
Thank you.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a jobs, a stimulus bill we passed in this committee. Didn't get to the floor. H.R. 6258, the Carbon Capture and Storage Early Deployment Act. It never made it to the floor. All this would do would empower the loan guarantee program to move expeditiously on carbon capture sequestration. What does that mean? That means pipelines being built in the ground, starting today, starting tomorrow, especially on power plants that have coal gasification facilities. They're being built right now, and this is the first of many pro-coal votes that I will be offering in this Congress. If you want low-cost power and you support coal, you need to use the money in the stimulus bill to incentivize the laying of pipelines to help move the carbon to either long-term geological storage or advanced oil recovery. There's interest in the Gulf Coast to use this technology to recover more crude oil. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to assist on a roll call vote, and with that, I yield back my time.
I'll withdraw my reservation.
The gentlelady withdraws her reservation. Mr. Markey is recognized for
I thank the gentleman.
Opposition.
And to the gentleman from Illinois, we all agree that there has to be significant funding for carbon capture and sequestration research. As a result, in another part of the stimulus bill, there is $2.4 billion for carbon capture and sequestration research and development. This is a section that goes to renewables. So all we're really asking here is that you render to the renewables their section, even as we will render to carbon capture and sequestration and coal their section, which is $2.4 billion, which I wholeheartedly support, as do all of us over here. We realize that we cannot solve the problem unless we have a carbon capture and sequestration. But we would ask you, please, not to have this program be used as well for that, because we're trying to, again, put together a broad-based program, and here we have a kind of an attempt to raid the renewables for a program that is already being well-funded in another part of the stimulus bill, and I urge a no vote from the members.
Will the gentleman yield just for a sec? Mr. Markey?
Yes, I'll be glad.
Just because you referred to the other section, there's a debate in the other section about the word storage versus sequestration, so that's why it's problematic to defer to the language in that area. And just for time, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Mr. Markey, you yield back the balance of your time?
I yield back to balance.
All time has expired. The clerk will call the roll.
All right. Mr. Waxman?
No.
Mr. Waxman, no. Mr. Dingle? Mr. Dingle, no. Mr. Markey? Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Boucher? Mr. Pallone? Mr. Gordon? Mr. Gordon, no. Mr. Rush?
Loan guarantees for carbon capture and sequestration. I don't believe him.
Ms. Eshu?
Okay.
Mr. Stupak? Mr. Stupak, no. Mr. Engel? Mr. Engel, no. Mr. Green? Mr. Green, no. Ms. DeGette? Ms. DeGette, no. Mrs. Capps? Mrs. Capps, no. Mr. Doyle? Mr. Doyle, no. Ms. Harmon? Ms. Harmon, no. Ms. Schakowsky? Ms. Schakowsky, no. Mr. Gonzalez? Mr. Gonzalez votes no. Mr. Inslee? Mr. Inslee, no. Ms. Baldwin? Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Ross? Mr. Ross, no. Mr. Weiner? Mr. Weiner, no. Mr. Matheson? Mr. Butterfield? Mr. Butterfield, no. Mr. Melanson? Mr. Melanson votes no. Mr. Barrow? Mr. Barrow, no. Mr. Hill? Mr. Hill, no. Ms. Matsui? Ms. Matsui, no. Mrs. Christensen? Mrs. Christensen, no. Ms. Castor? Ms. Castor, no. Mr. Sarbanes? Mr. Sarbanes, no. Mr. Murphy of Connecticut? Mr. Murphy of Connecticut, no. Mr. Space? Mr. Space, no. Mr. McNerney? Mr. McNerney, no. Ms. Sutton? Ms. Sutton, no. Mr. Braley? Mr. Braley, no. Mr. Welch? Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Barton? Mr. Barton votes aye. Mr. Hall? Mr. Hall, aye. Mr. Upton? Mr. Upton, aye. Mr. Stearns? Mr. Stearns, aye. Mr. Deal? Mr. Deal, aye. Mr. Whitfield? Mr. Whitfield, aye. Mr. Shimkus? Mr. Shimkus, aye. Mr. Shadegg? Mr. Shadegg, aye. Mr. Blunt? Mr. Blunt, aye. Mr. Boyer? Mr. Boyer, aye. Mr. Radonovich? Mr. Radonovich, aye. Mr. Pitts? Mr. Pitts votes aye. Ms. Bono-Mack? Ms. Bono-Mack votes aye. Mr. Walden? Mr. Walden, aye. Mr. Terry? Mr. Terry, aye. Mr. Rogers? Mr. Rogers, aye. Mrs. Myrick? Mr. Sullivan? Mr. Murphy of Pennsylvania? Mr. Murphy of Pennsylvania, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Ms. Blackburn? Mr. Gingrey? Mr. Scalise? Mr. Scalise, aye. What have we missed? Pallone? Mr. Pallone? Do you want to vote? Mr. Pallone votes no. Ms. Eshoo? Ms. Eshoo votes no. Mr. Rush? Mr. Rush votes no.
Have all members responded to the roll? Any member wish to respond to the roll that has not yet responded to the roll? Any member wish to change his or her vote? The vote is closed, and the clerk will calculate the vote and report it.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, the ayes were 19 and the nays were 34.
19 ayes, 34 noes. The amendment is not agreed to. Next